We will control the vertical.
Welcome to the first episode of Anthologic, the TV anthology podcast. I'm your host, Mark. Now, this is a cast dedicated to explore the good, the bad, and the odd of horror and sci-fi anthology series on TV, with the occasional journey into mystery and suspense shows, the really good ones. And we're ranging through the likes of The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, Night Gallery, and going right up to much more modern shows, such as Dimension 404, Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams, and Black Mirror. Now, anthology show. I've looked up the definition of anthology, and it is a book or a collection of writings, usually by various authors, usually on the same subject, or it's a collection of stories by the same author. That's the dictionary term. We know anthology TV as being shows which show one or more stories per episode that aren't particularly connected, or maybe they have the same framing device, but in all other respects they're distinct stories, but the themes and the issues and the tone tend to be similar. So the format of this podcast will be this. Each week will consist of reviewing a single episode from a single show. So we'll be starting chronologically for whatever shows I pick up. So it'll always be episode 1 for this first season. Each episode will typically I'm going to kind of rotate it. So 1 week I'm going to cover one of what I consider the classics. Now, the classics to me are probably The Outer Limits, The Twilight Zone, and Night Gallery. So I'll be rotating 1 week an episode from one of those shows, and then the next week another episode from one of the other shows in my list. Now, I've got a fairly long list of about 40 different series, so there's quite a lot to get through. And I'd say most of them are horror and sci-fi titles, but occasionally I'm going to step into some of the better mystery and suspense shows, and I'm talking about shows such as Tales of the Unexpected, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and Thriller, that kind of thing. Usually it's either going to be just me, but sometimes I'll be having a guest co-host to come on now and again to discuss the episode. I don't envisage any episode to be particularly long. This is going to be a short, sharp, little, I hope, treat to the ears rather than something you have to listen to for a particularly long time. Right, so with this inaugural episode, I am going to start by reviewing the very first episode of my favourite anthology show. It's my show, so I get to do this, right? And that is The Outer Limits. Now, the original Outer Limits, that is. This is my personal favourite. It started in 1963, ran for 2 seasons, a total of 49 episodes. Not bad, right? 49 episodes. But then it was also revived in 1995, and it ran for 7 years in that format. I haven't seen any of the newer version, but I've certainly seen all of the old ones over the years. Now, the original one, one of the main creative forces, and certainly the executive producer, and the man that I think thought up the concept of this, was Leslie Stevens, a writer in his own right. He also put in a fair bit of time writing on this show and directing, in fact, as well. He was titled the executive producer. Also involved was a chap called Joseph Stefano, a writer of some repute. For example, he wrote the script for Psycho. There's pretty good cred. And he was mostly involved in the season 1, and then that was taken over by Ben Brady. Now, these guys will be called the showrunners of the day, but Stefano was quite instrumental in making The Outer Limits what it was, setting the tone for it. I'll explain why shortly. This show was actually influenced in turn by The Twilight Zone, which came a few years earlier, I think 5 years earlier, and another even earlier show, which I'll be covering at some point, which is Science Fiction Theatre. Originally it was going to be titled Please Stand By, but I don't think the network liked that, and The Outer Limits was decided on. This show's been kicking around for a long time. It's slightly more obscure and less known than, say, Twilight Zone, but it's still reasonably well known. And in fact, one of its episodes was rated in 1997 as 98th in the 100 greatest episodes of all time, and that episode was called The Zanti Misfits, which we'll get to at some point. Now, The Twilight Zone came before, as I say, but that was kind of whimsical, and it was morality tales, and there was a few horror episodes, but often it was kind of softer edged. But however, Outer Limits was a different prospect, and that, I think, why it's still being talked about today, actually. Stephen King in Danse Macabre says about The Outer Limits, for sheer hard-edged clarity of concept, The Twilight Zone could not match The Outer Limits. King talks a little about Stefano in this book. It's a great book, but the idea is that Stefano had this concept of something he called the bear. He wanted each episode to have the bear, which he also wanted to be shown just before the first advert break, and that was to keep the viewers watching after, to carry on watching once the adverts were over. So he'd revealed the monster. Now, the bear sometimes it was a malevolent force, but often it wasn't, and sometimes it was the reaction to it that had the malevolence of the episode. It was kind of pretty cool. And to quote King again, The Outer Limits is the best program of its type to ever run on network TV. So that's a high endorsement, right? Not only was this concept of a bear one of the sort of hallmarks of The Outer Limits, but there were certain things about it. It had a certain eerie tone. It used a certain cinematography that sort of made it stand out. It borrowed from film noir, borrowed from expressionism. It's full of Dutch angles. You watch an episode, there's a lot of Dutch angles and odd distant shots, like intense close-ups at strange angles, stuff like that. And it gives it its own real distinct and eerie feel in certainly in the season 1 and some of the episodes of season 2. And also it uses this quite odd striking music. So it's got quite an interesting tone as The Outer Limits. It's one of the reasons I like it so much, I think. In turn, it went into influence all sorts of other things. Not perhaps as influential as The Twilight Zone, I wouldn't say, but there are some direct influences. For example, The Terminator. There is an issue with The Terminator, Harlan Ellison's sue over a script he wrote for The Outer Limits that he felt was being ripped off by The Terminator, and he won his case, and there is a credit now in The Terminator saying thanks to Harlan Ellison. So there you go. But there's also there's another episode, which is an early one, which I felt was a strong influence on the comic book series for The Watchmen. But I'll cover that when I get to that episode. My personal history with The Outer Limits is it's something I was kind of aware of by reading about it before seeing it. It wasn't on UK TV as far as I know when I was a boy, but when I was a boy I used to collect, I was a monster kid, so I used to collect a sort of weird magazine poster folder called Monster Mag, and I do remember seeing one section in it where it talked about The Outer Limits and some of the crazy stuff going on. It didn't explain it was an old show, so it was like, what's this show they're talking about? There was a picture of a guy with massive eyes, for example. Then there was pictures of the Zanti Misfits and some of the other monsters we kind of know about The Outer Limits. So I was kind of aware of it and I itching to see it. And then eventually it did land, I think, on a Friday night, fairly late on British TV on BBC Two. So I got to saw it and I kind of fell in love with it straight away. Since that first episode, I've always liked The Outer Limits. I've never sort of diverged from that. There's so many striking things about it. I've talked about the cinematography and its use of strange angles and stuff. There's also quite iconic opening and closing credits where we control the vertical, we control the horizontal, that kind of stuff. And you'll kind of hear my reference on that in both the intro music for this podcast and the outro music. That's how much I like The Outer Limits. So The Outer Limits, great. Let's move on from there and just talk about this particular episode. So this is season 1, episode 1. This was called The Galaxy Being. Funny enough, I've talked about Leslie Season as the executive producer. He actually directed this episode and wrote it, and he even voiced the alien that appears in this one. We get cinematographer John M. Nicklaus, who did a fair few episodes, I believe, and it originally aired on September 16, 1963, so a fair bit away, right? It starts essentially with a small-time radio station playing music in a small town. But we see one of the main engineers is kind of tied out with something, experimenting, beaming information into space, communicating with the stars. Interesting. Eventually, it gets there's all this discussion in the first act. His wife is a bit annoyed because he's kind of so busy and wants him to sort of tear himself away to go do other stuff. There's even a testimonial for him about his good work, and he kind of doesn't want to go because his stuff's going on, but his wife talks him into it. Anyway, he manages to establish communication with an alien from another place. This alien's a bit different, apparently made up of energy, and it can kind of communicate. And eventually they learn the language and start communicating. But the alien's quite different. It is humanoid in shape, even though it's an energy form. I think. But it hasn't got a mouth, say, and it doesn't understand of eating. And there's this interesting to and fro. Quite cool writing. Now, the man involved in this engineer is played by Cliff Robertson. I don't know him so much. I've seen him in a few things. He's a fairly sort of... he looks the part. The only thing I can remember him from, apart from this, is I remember he appeared in another fantasy TV series, the 60s version of Batman. And he played quite an interesting villain that I think only ever appeared in the TV series, as far as I know, which was like a cowboy villain called Shame. That was him. In addition, his wife's played by Jacqueline Scott. She's got a bit more chops around horror and so on. She appeared in William Castle's Macabre. She was pretty good in that. And I think she also had a bit part in Duel. Yeah, it is pretty good. The first act's a bit overwritten. It's a bit tortured, but it's as a product of the time, really, early 60s TV. But having said that, it does move along at a fair clip. And as I say, there was this concept of having the bear appear just before the first advert, which is only like 15 minutes in or so. So yeah, this galaxy being is in communication. We also discover he's not meant to communicate with Earth because Earth's considered a hostile sort of spot not to go to. So there's a touch of Day of the Earth Stood Still in this whole thing. Anyway, he has to go off to this testimonial. There's a guest disc jockey in who's like looking after the station for the night, and he warns him not to turn up this particular switch because he doesn't know the effect. But once he's left, the disc jockey realises they're not transmitting that far, and he wants everyone to hear. He wants his name recognised far and wide, so he turns up the power. This has the unfortunate effect of not only locking the alien into the beam but dragging him down, and he comes down to this planet. Now, because he consists of radiation and pure energy, him walking around is destructive. He's not malevolent. What he can do is malevolent, unintentionally do is malevolent. I think he disposes of the guest disc jockey by mistake, for example, and then he's kind of walking around. So it goes on like this. There's the police turn up, and it kind of gets violent towards the end, and the wife accidentally gets shot, but the alien uses his radiation to heal her. I don't quite know how that works, but he does. And at the end, he says, the alien's I can't go back because I'll be punished for coming here. Just kind of turn the beam off and let me go. And the engine is concerned he's going to kill the alien, but the alien says, there's no death for me. Anyway, he turns off the beam and the alien just disappears. And we get quite a good ending monologue about, we've got to reach out and we've got to try and understand each other and understand what's going on. Curiosity is a good thing. This is an interesting episode because it is about curiosity being destructive. So there's a touch of Frankenstein in it, so that's kind of cool. And I think, I don't know how old SETI is, but I kind of feel like they were riffing on the idea of SETI. So there's all that. As I say, some interesting shots. The special effects were reasonable. They kind of were using negatives back and forth on the alien to sort of give you an idea of otherworldliness. The voice was, as I say, Leslie Stevens himself, but modulated to sound different. And I thought the special effects were decent. I thought this was a solid opening episode, a pretty good one. If you want to try and catch this, I've looked into this, and I did find on UK Prime you can buy particular episodes for they're on sale. It's not on YouTube. You can also get it on DVD and Blu-ray. The DVD box set is actually reasonably cheap from the ones I saw. I personally have had this box set DVD since it came out, so I think my set's probably at least 15 years old, maybe older. So I've had it since forever, and it still looks pretty good on a big screen because of that monochrome just works and the interesting angles and stuff. So there is all that. So I recommend from me. So next time it'll be an alternate week, and I'll be picking one of the other anthology shows. So it won't be an Outer Limits, a Twilight Zone, or a Night Gallery. It'll be something else. But I'll give you a hint what it might be. It's going to be something from that where I got the music for the opening credits to this podcast. It's going to be one of those. So if you're really interested and can't wait, go back and listen, and you might be able to guess. But until next week, we're signing off. So goodbye from Anthologic.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to